November 2nd, 1943, 02 o'clock hours, mid-Atlantic, 800 miles west of Ireland. Korvettenkapitän Reinhard Hardegen stared through the periscope of U-123 at a sight that should have been impossible. Through the spray-soaked lens, illuminated by a half-moon breaking through storm clouds, he counted merchant ships stretching to the horizon. Not a dozen, not 2 dozen, at least 40 vessels in a convoy so massive it took him 3 full periscope rotations to see from one end to the other. In 2 years of combat, Hardegen had become one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders. 22 confirmed kills, over 100,000 tons of Allied shipping sent to the bottom. The Knight's Cross with oak leaves hung at his throat. His crew worshipped him. Admiral Dönitz called him the best in the Atlantic. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. The convoy was designated SC-143, though Hardegen didn't know that designation. What he knew was that 40 merchant ships meant 40 targets. His U-boat carried 14 torpedoes. Even if every shot found its mark, he could only sink a third of them. And there was something else, something that made the tactical calculation even more disturbing. Every single one of those ships looked identical. Same hull shape, same superstructure, same profile. From 3,000 meters away in darkness, they appeared to be the same vessel, copied 40 times and placed in formation like toys arranged by a meticulous child. Hardegen had been hunting Allied shipping since 1941. He knew British tramps, Norwegian tankers, Dutch freighters. Every merchant ship had individual characteristics, quirks of construction, modifications made over years of service. These ships had none. They were uniform, industrial, mass-produced. His executive officer, Oberleutnant zur See Horst von Schroeter, leaned close and whispered the question that was forming in Hardegen's mind. Herr Kaloy, how many of these have they built? Hardegen didn't answer. He was doing mathematics in his head, mathematics that led to conclusions he didn't want to accept. If this convoy contained 40 identical ships, and this was just one convoy, and Allied convoys ran continuously across the Atlantic, then the Americans were producing merchant vessels at a rate that exceeded anything German intelligence had predicted, not by margins, by orders of magnitude. The intelligence briefings at Lorient Submarine Base were clear. American shipbuilding capacity was estimated at 200 to 300 merchant ships per year, a respectable number, but manageable for the U-boat fleet to counter. Admiral Dönitz's plan was simple mathematics. Sink more ships than the Allies could build. Force them to choose between supplying Britain and supplying Russia. Create a tonnage crisis that would strangle both fronts. Make the Atlantic so dangerous that merchant crews refused to sail. The plan had worked beautifully in 1942. That glorious year, which U-boat crews called the Happy Time, had seen over 1,600 Allied ships destroyed. Hardegen himself had participated in Operation Paukenschlag, drumbeat, sinking 8 ships in American coastal waters during a single patrol. The eastern seaboard of the United States had burned with torpedoed tankers. Bodies washed up on beaches from Maine to Florida. The tonnage totals made Admiral Dönitz smile in staff meetings. Victory seemed mathematical, inevitable, close. But now, in November 1943, Hardegen was staring at evidence that the mathematics had changed. 40 identical ships in one convoy suggested production on a scale that rendered U-boat operations meaningless. If the Americans could replace losses faster than Germany could sink ships, then every torpedo he fired was just an expensive gesture. Every crew he sent to the bottom was a tactical success that meant nothing strategically. He gave the order, "Battle stations, prepare for surface attack." U-123 rose from the depths like a predator. In the darkness and rough seas, they could approach closer before being detected. Hardegen planned to hit the convoy from inside its formation, firing from point-blank range before escorts could react. It was dangerous, borderline suicidal, but it maximized their chances of inflicting heavy damage before diving and escaping. They closed to 800 meters. The merchant ships loomed above them, massive steel walls moving through the Atlantic swells. Hardegen selected his targets. The 3 ships in the center of the formation, close together, presenting overlapping profiles. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3, 3 torpedoes in rapid succession, each aimed at a different target. The first explosion came 28 seconds later. A column of water and flame erupted amidships on the lead target. The ship shuddered, began listing immediately. The second torpedo struck its target in the engine room. That ship went dead in the water, settling by the stern. The third torpedo missed, passing ahead of its target as the ship altered course in response to the first explosions. Hardegen cursed but maintained his position. Reload tubes 1 through 3. He would fire again before diving. This was the kind of opportunity that came once in a career, a target-rich environment with dozens of kills possible if they stayed aggressive. But the escorts were already reacting. Star shells burst above the convoy, turning night into harsh white day. A British destroyer on the convoy's flank had detected them. Its signal lamp blinked urgently as it increased speed and turned toward U-123's position. Dive, dive, dive. U-123 crash-dived, sinking rapidly as the destroyer closed. Depth charges began detonating, each explosion a hammer blow against the pressure hull. The lights flickered, cork insulation rained from the overhead. Men gripped whatever was close as the boat shook violently. But Hardegen's crew was experienced. They'd survived depth charge attacks before. They went deep, silent, waiting. After 2 hours, the destroyer gave up the search and returned to the convoy. U-123 crept back to periscope depth. Hardegen surveyed the results. 2 ships sinking. The convoy continuing. 38 undamaged vessels steaming toward Britain with their cargoes intact. 2 kills in exchange for expending 3 torpedoes, nearly drowning his entire crew and alerting every escort in the area. The tactical mathematics were acceptable. The strategic mathematics were devastating. If 40 ships arrived, and he sank 2, the Allies still received 38 ships worth of supplies. That was 95% success rate for the convoy, 95% failure rate for the U-boat. He withdrew to send his patrol report. 2 ships sunk, convoy designation unknown, estimated 40 vessels total, proceeding toward Britain. He coded the message and transmitted it in the brief burst transmission that was supposed to prevent radio direction finding. Then he waited for acknowledgement from U-boat command. The response came 6 hours later. Well done. Continue patrol. Report any additional contacts. That was all. No questions about the convoy size. No shock at 40 identical ships. No indication that U-boat command found anything unusual about what Hardegen had reported. Either they already knew about American mass production, or they didn't believe his estimate. He suspected the latter. 3 days later, U-123 encountered another convoy. This one was smaller, only 25 ships, but they were the same identical ships he'd seen before. Same hull, same profile. mass-produced freighters that looked like they'd been stamped out by a machine. He attacked and sank one tanker before escorts forced him deep. 1 kill out of 25 targets. The patrol continued for another 3 weeks. Hardegen's crew hunted across the North Atlantic, seeking targets, expending their remaining torpedoes. They sank 3 more ships, respectable numbers for a single patrol. His running total climbed to 27 confirmed kills, making him one of the top-scoring U-boat commanders in the entire Kriegsmarine. But something had fundamentally changed. The psychological impact of what Hardegen had witnessed was spreading through his crew. The younger sailors asked questions. If the Americans can build 40 identical ships for one convoy, how many convoys are there? How many ships are they building? Can we possibly sink them faster than they're being
replaced? The veteran crew members who'd survived since 1941 had their own concerns. They'd noticed the change in Allied anti-submarine warfare. Better radar, more aggressive escort tactics, aircraft appearing in mid-ocean where they shouldn't have the range to operate. Escort carriers, miniature aircraft carriers built on merchant hulls, providing air cover in areas previously beyond land-based aircraft range. The combination was lethal. More targets than could be sunk, better defenses making it harder to sink any of them. And behind it all, American industrial production operating on a scale that rendered individual U-boat successes meaningless. U-123 returned to Lorient submarine base on December 3, 1943. Hardegen submitted his patrol report and attended the mandatory debriefing. The intelligence officers asked detailed questions about convoy routes, escort strength, and weather conditions. They seemed less interested in his observations about ship construction and production numbers. Finally, Hardegen asked directly, "How many merchant ships are the Americans building?" The intelligence officer checked his files. Current estimates suggest American production is running at approximately 400 vessels annually. This represents an increase from earlier estimates, but remains within acceptable parameters for our operational planning. 400 ships per year. Hardegen did the calculation immediately. That was more than 1 ship per day, every single day, all year long. The U-boat fleet would need to sink 1 ship every single day just to break even with American production. And that couldn't account for British shipyards, Canadian shipyards, or repairs to damaged vessels that returned to service. "Is that number confirmed?" Hardegen pressed. "Have we verified American production capacity through reliable intelligence?" The officer looked uncomfortable. "Our estimates are based on analysis of multiple sources, including aerial reconnaissance of American shipyards, signals intelligence, and reports from agents in neutral countries. We believe them to be accurate." Hardegen didn't believe them to be accurate. He believed them to be catastrophically wrong. But he was a combat commander, not an intelligence analyst. He filed his report and went to the officers' mess where other U-boat commanders were gathering for the evening. The conversation that night was revealing. Every commander who'd been on patrol in recent months had similar stories. Massive convoys, identical ships clearly mass-produced, improved escorts, better radar, more aggressive tactics, and, most disturbingly, no matter how many ships they sank, the convoys kept coming, bigger, more numerous, better defended.
Korvettenkapitan Eric Topp, another ace with 34 kills to his credit, summed up the growing consensus. "We're winning tactically and losing strategically. Every patrol report shows kills. Every patrol returns with fewer boats than departed. The mathematics don't favor us anymore." Admiral Dönitz visited Lorient 3 weeks later. Hardegen attended the briefing where Dönitz laid out the operational plan for 1944. More U-boats were entering service. New technology, including snorkel systems, would allow submarines to remain submerged longer. Improved torpedoes with acoustic homing would increase kill rates. Victory was still achievable through aggressive action and superior German seamanship. During the question period, Hardegen raised his hand. "Herr Admiral, Our intelligence estimates American merchant ship production at 400 vessels annually. Based on convoy sizes I observed during my last patrol, I believe this estimate is significantly low. Have we considered the possibility that American production exceeds our ability to sink their ships? Dernich's expression hardened. The room went silent. Every commander present knew that questioning the admiral's strategic assessment was dangerous. Dernitz had Hitler's complete confidence. He reported directly to the Führer. Suggesting that his tonnage warfare strategy might be flawed was professional suicide. Kapitan Hardegen, Dernitz began slowly, I appreciate your combat experience. Your record speaks for itself. However, strategic planning requires broader perspective than individual patrol observations. American production, while substantial, remains within manageable parameters. Our operational analysis accounts for all relevant factors. Your duty is to sink enemy ships. Leave the strategic assessment to those with access to complete intelligence. The rebuke was clear. Hardegen accepted it and sat down. But the question remained unanswered. And in the weeks that followed, other commanders began asking similar questions. The anecdotal evidence from multiple patrols was building into a pattern that couldn't be ignored. The truth, which German intelligence failed to grasp until far too late, was that American merchant ship production wasn't 400 vessels per year, it was 3,000. The Liberty ship program, combined with other merchant construction, was producing an average of 8 vessels per day. Not per month, per day. Every 24 hours, somewhere in America, 8 new merchant ships slid down shipways into the water. 8 ships that could each carry 10,000 tons of cargo across the Atlantic. The production miracle was centered on 18 major shipyards scattered along American coasts, but the scale of construction exceeded anything in naval history. The SS Robert E. Peary, the ship that held the construction record, had been built in 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. German intelligence declared this impossible propaganda. It was documented fact. The secret was standardization and prefabrication. Every Liberty ship was identical. Every component was manufactured to exact specifications at factories across America, then shipped to assembly yards where they were welded together like giant model kits. The hull came in prefabricated sections. The engines were installed as complete units. The deck houses were lifted into place by massive cranes. The electrical systems came pre-wired in modular sections. Workers who'd never seen a ship before Pearl Harbor were building ocean-going freighters after 6 weeks of training. The welding process, which German naval architects considered inferior to traditional riveting, proved faster and ultimately stronger. Quality control was achieved through standardization rather than craftsmanship. If a component didn't fit perfectly, it was rejected and replaced. No adjustments, no modifications, no skilled workers spending days hand-fitting parts. The workforce was revolutionary. Women comprised significant percentages of shipyard workers. African Americans, excluded from many defense industries, found employment in shipyards that desperately needed labor. The elderly, the disabled, anyone who could work contributed. And they weren't building warships that required years of specialized knowledge. They were building cargo carriers that needed to float, move, and hold together for a few Atlantic crossings. The economics were equally revolutionary. A Liberty ship cost $1.8 million to build. That was expensive, but manageable for an economy producing $200 billion annually. Germany's entire GDP was $75 billion. America could afford to build merchant ships faster than Germany could sink them and still have resources left over for everything else. Hardegen went on one more patrol in early 1944. U-123 departed Lorient on February 15th and headed for the North Atlantic shipping lanes. The patrol was a disaster from the beginning. Allied air patrols were constant. Radar-equipped aircraft could detect submarines on the surface from miles away. Staying submerged meant traveling at 4 knots and seeing nothing. Surfacing to search for targets meant immediate air attack.
In 3 weeks of patrol, U-123 didn't sink a single ship. They were attacked by aircraft 4 times, depth-charged by escorts twice. On March 8th, while attempting to attack a convoy south of Iceland, They were caught on the surface by a B-24 Liberator equipped with centimetric radar and depth charges. The aircraft's attack damaged U-123's pressure hull and forced them to abort the patrol. They limped back to Lorient barely able to dive, arriving on March 15, 1944. Hardegen submitted his report. 0 kills, extensive damage. 7 weeks of patrol resulting in nothing but survival. It was his last combat patrol. In April 1944, he was assigned to training duties. The official reason was that his experience was needed to train new U-boat commanders. The unofficial reason was that Admiral Dunitz could see the same thing Hardegen saw. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost. The statistics proved it with mathematical certainty. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,664 Allied ships, totaling 7.8 million tons. In that same year, Allied shipyards built 7.1 million tons of new shipping. The U-boats were winning, barely. In 1943, U-boats sank 812 ships, totaling 3.6 million tons. Allied shipyards built 13.5 million tons. The U-boats were losing badly. In 1944, U-boats sank 458 ships, totaling 1.4 million tons. Allied shipyards built 11.6 million tons. The U-boats were irrelevant. But the human cost of this strategic failure was measured in sunken submarines and drowned crews. In 1943, 237 U-boats were lost, with approximately 6,000 crew killed. In 1944, another 241 boats were lost, with another 6,000 men. By 1945, the survival rate for U-boat crews had dropped to less than 25%. 3 out of 4 men who went to sea in U-boats would never return. Hardegen survived the war. U-123 was sunk on August 17, 1944, by American destroyers, while he was safely ashore training new crews, who would likely die on their first patrols. After Germany's surrender, he was interviewed extensively by Allied intelligence officers who wanted to understand German strategic thinking. The Americans showed him production statistics that he initially refused to believe. 2,751 Liberty ships built during the war, 414 Victory ships, an improved design, hundreds of tankers, coastal freighters, and specialized cargo vessels. Total American merchant ship production exceeded 5,000 vessels. The final tonnage was 39 million tons of merchant shipping, more than the combined merchant fleets of every nation on Earth before the war. The Americans asked Hardegen when he'd realized Germany was losing the Atlantic battle. He described that November night in 1943, when he'd counted 40 identical ships in one convoy. That was when I knew we couldn't win. Not because we lacked courage or skill or dedication, but because you'd industrialized ship construction the way Ford industrialized automobiles. We were craftsmen building U-boats one at a time. You were building cargo ships like you built cars. Thousands of them. All identical. All functional. All replaceable. The interviewer pressed further. Your intelligence estimated 400 ships per year. We built 3,000. How did German planning go so wrong? Hardegen's answer was simple. We couldn't conceive of it. Our worldview didn't allow for the possibility of such production. We calculated what we could build and assumed you might build twice that. We never imagined you would build 10 times what we could. It violated everything we understood about industrial capacity and economic systems. The American officer showed Hardegen photographs of Kaiser shipyards, aerial views of 18 ways operating simultaneously, each way holding a Liberty ship in various stages of construction. Massive cranes moving prefabricated sections weighing hundreds of tons. thousands of workers swarming over hulls like ants building a colony. Hardegen stared at the images for a long time. Then he spoke quietly. "We lost the war the moment you decided to win it. Not in 1944 or 1943, but in 1940, when your industries began preparing for war production. We were fighting battles. You were building an arsenal. There was never any doubt about the outcome. We just didn't know it yet." The final accounting was sobering. German U-boats sank approximately 3,000 Allied merchant ships during the war. The Allies built 20,000. For every ship sunk, 7 were built. The tonnage ratio was even worse. U-boats sank 14.5 million tons of shipping. Allied yards built 60 million tons. For every ton sent to the bottom, 4 tons were launched. The mathematics were impossible. But behind the statistics were human stories. The merchant seamen who died, over 30,000 of them, when ships were torpedoed in cold Atlantic waters. The U-boat crews, over 28,000 of them, who drowned when their submarines were sunk. The workers in American shipyards who built the vessels, many of them women and minorities who'd been excluded from industrial work before the war. The truck drivers who delivered materials, the train engineers who moved steel and machinery, the welders, electricians, pipe fitters, crane operators, all part of a massive industrial effort that crushed Germany's maritime campaign through sheer production capacity. Reinhard Hardegen lived until 2018, dying at age 105. In his final interviews, he reflected on his wartime experiences and the lessons learned. "I was decorated, celebrated, called a hero. I sank 27 ships and thought I was winning the war. But every ship I sank was replaced by 3 more before my next patrol. I was fighting industrial democracy with individual excellence. Excellence doesn't scale. Production does. The Americans understood that. We didn't." He described visiting the United States in 1976 for a reunion with American destroyer captains who'd hunted him during the war. They took him to Richmond, California, where Kaiser had built hundreds of Liberty ships. The shipyards were gone, converted back to commercial use. But the scale of the former facilities was still visible. Multiple ways stretching hundreds of meters, crane tracks that had lifted entire deck sections, assembly buildings that had housed thousands of workers. "This is where we lost," Hardegen said to his former enemies. "Not in the Atlantic. Here, in these shipyards. You built victory while we fought defeat. We never had a chance." The story of Hardegen and the Liberty ships illustrates the fundamental truth of industrial warfare. Individual skill, superior tactics, and brave soldiers matter. But in total war between industrial powers, production capacity determines victory. The side that can build more weapons, train more soldiers, and replace losses faster will prevail regardless of individual combat outcomes. Germany's U-boat campaign achieved tactical successes, killed thousands of Allied sailors, and disrupted supply lines. But it failed strategically because German planners never understood the scale of American industrial capacity. They calculated that sinking 700,000 tons per month would cripple Allied supply lines. They achieved this goal multiple times. It didn't matter. America was building 1,000,000 tons per month. The Liberty ship, mocked by German naval architects as a crude temporary measure, proved to be a war-winning weapon, not through individual capability, but through mass production, not through superior design, but through standardized simplicity, not through craftsmanship, but through industrial efficiency. In 4 years, American workers, most of them new to shipbuilding, constructed more merchant vessels than had been built in the previous century of naval architecture. They didn't build better ships, they built enough ships. And in modern warfare, enough is better than best. Hardegen's realization that November night in 1943, counting 40 identical vessels in one convoy, came too late to change German strategy. But it captured the moment when a skilled combat commander understood that skill wouldn't save him. The Americans weren't trying to outfight the U-boats. They were trying to outbuild them. And they succeeded so completely that individual U-boat aces became irrelevant. Every submarine in the Atlantic could have been commanded by Hardegen himself, and it wouldn't have mattered. The mathematics of mass production had rendered individual excellence meaningless.
The lesson resonates today. In peer conflicts between industrial powers, production capacity matters more than initial force quality. The ability to replace losses, sustain operations, and overwhelm opponents through sheer numbers determines outcomes. Technology and tactics matter. Training and leadership matter. But industrial capacity matters most. America learned this lesson in the Atlantic. Germany learned it too late. The cost of that education was measured in tens of thousands of drowned sailors on both sides, and a maritime campaign that Germany lost not through poor fighting, but through failing to understand that modern war is won in factories, not on battlefields.